In this episode of the ASC podcast with John Goehle, we discuss the latest news and information in the ASC industry. We'll discuss the effect of the government shutdown on CMS surveys, review the recent Amazon Web Services issues and its impact on ASC computer systems, and celebrate Cybersecurity Month with Paul Alcock from Surgical Information Systems.
This episode of the ASC podcast with John Goehle is sponsored by Surgical Information Systems, SIS. SIS's mission is to deliver solutions and services that help surgery providers, regardless of care setting, improve their organization so they can deliver the highest level of care to their patients. For more information, go to sisfirst.com.
Welcome to episode 259 of the ASC podcast with John Goehle, recorded on October 31st, 2025 from our studios in Spencerport, New York. I'm Sue Cronkite, your co-host and operations manager at Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies. As a reminder, the regulatory landscape for ASCs is constantly changing. The content in this episode reflects the current information available at the time of recording. We encourage all ASCs to remain vigilant and to keep up with any updates or any new guidelines released by their relevant regulatory authorities. Joining me today is John Goehle, owner of Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies and one of the leading experts in the ambulatory surgery field. With over 3 decades of experience, John has authored more than 10 books on the ASC industry and is a highly regarded speaker on topics related to regulation, accreditation, and financial management.
So, Sue, I've been on the conference tour lately. I've been attending a lot of the state association conferences. I think I have 2 more to go before the end of the year, and I'll be heading up to Washington this coming week. We've published quite a number of special episodes from these state associations. Though it's been a little bit longer to publish them. Have you noticed, Sue? Because we have to get permission sometimes from our speakers before we can actually publish the interviews. So that's why they are taking a little bit longer than normal. A lot going on in the industry. This is Cybersecurity Month. Of course, we're right at the very end of it right now, but we did have an opportunity to interview Paul Alcock from SIS about it. But Sue, as we were putting together the kind of the agenda for this episode, we just noticed there's a lot going on in the computer field, so we thought we'd have a little bit of a focus on that, as well as another conversation about the government shutdown, which we had hoped we would be done by the time we published our next episode. But we'll give you a little bit of an update on that. And I actually hope that by the time we publish the episode, it'll be over with, but I'm not at all confident that will occur. So, Sue, let's talk about some of the recent news.
Okay. So in late October, CMS released an updated memorandum that explained how survey and certification activities will be handled in the event of a federal government shutdown. The goal, according to CMS, is to protect Medicare and Medicaid beneficiaries from immediate dangers to life and health while avoiding interruptions that could jeopardize access to essential care. So what I'm going to go over is right from CMS, and I just want to note that I'm only covering parts of this, so please go to the CMS site for more complete information and more details.
And I'll provide a link to the actual, this actually comes out, Sue, from a QSO, QSO-26-01, entitled All Revised, which is titled Contingency Plans State Survey and Certification Activities in the Event of a Federal Government Shutdown. So that's the official title, and we'll provide a link to that.
Yeah. So the things that will not be affected by the shutdown are CLIA survey and certification functions that are funded through user fees, and therefore they're not directly affected by the federal government shutdown. CMS or state vendor contracts that were awarded on or before September 30th of 2025. State-funded surveys. The lapse in appropriations does not impact state work for those states that are completing licensure surveys. However, those licensure surveys may not be assumed to count as federal surveys during the period of the lapse in appropriations.
And let me just mention that many states, when they do come out to do a state licensure survey, will also do a federal certification. We'll combine those two. So those of you that have in the past gotten 2 survey reports during a survey, you're one of those organizations that have had a dual survey performed. So if the state does come out, they would only be coming out to do a state licensure survey.
Surveys of Medicaid-only facilities. States may conduct surveys of Medicaid-only provider types during the shutdown as the first quarter of Medicaid funding will not be impacted. In some accepted Medicare functions during the shutdown, during a lapse in appropriation, it is not legal for CMS or states acting on CMS's behalf to carry out federal survey and certification activities beyond those deemed to be accepted activities. Accepted activities are those related to the safety of human life or protection of property. If states carry out non-accepted functions under the auspices of the federal government, they should not represent these as federal survey and certification activities.
So some of the examples of those accepted functions would be complaint investigations and facility reported incidents that have alleged harm, and complaints that are triaged as credible allegations of immediate jeopardy or IJs or harm to an individual should be continued to be assessed and investigated. So your states will continue those investigations. Also accepted are certain federal enforcement actions that result from surveys noted in the previous discussion there. They should continue to be imposed if the findings indicate immediate jeopardy or actual harm.
And for revisit surveys, if they're approved by exception and necessary to prevent termination, state agencies may request approval to conduct a revisit when either a provider or a supplier has alleged compliance with CMS requirements pursuant to a prior determination of noncompliance, and if the revisit survey is necessary to determine compliance and prevent the scheduled Medicare termination of a provider or a supplier, or to prevent a statutorily mandated or 3-month denial of payment for new admissions. And immediate threats to life or safety, such as emergencies and natural disasters, state agencies should take action to prevent or mitigate any other immediate threats to the life or safety of a beneficiary, even if the situation does not fit into any of the preceding categories, such as survey and certification activities that may be necessary during a declared public health emergency or to prevent injury or harm to beneficiaries.
So that's a lot of words there, and a lot of it we have quoted on purpose directly from the QSO. Now, it is important to note that what we're saying here is that only very urgent issues are going to be taken up by the state surveyors during this time. So why don't we talk about those things that are specifically prohibited during the federal government shutdown? And the first one is standard surveys. No Medicare-funded recertification surveys shall be performed. Any processing of recently completed surveys where immediate jeopardy or patient or resident harm has been identified should be held until funding is restored.
And certain revisit surveys, the only ones that are allowed for now, are related to IJ or actual patient harm, or to prevent termination of Medicare participation within 45 days of termination. And no initial certification surveys are allowed, including deemed status. Certain complaint investigations, no Medicare complaint investigations shall be performed except those alleging immediate jeopardy or actual harm to individuals. And probably most importantly, processing of certification actions. Routine Medicare provider certification activities such as initial certifications, changes of ownership, and changes of location are not considered accepted activities and will not be completed until there is a restoration of funding.
I think that, as you mentioned, Sue, I think this is the one that could be quite concerning for people that are just starting the surgery center or unlucky enough to be starting a surgery center during this government shutdown. So they've made it clear that they will not be doing that activity. And as was mentioned earlier, even deemed status early option surveys are not going to occur because they do require Medicare intervention in order to actually report the results. So that's where we are right now. There is sometimes an update to this information, and we'll keep you informed as we get more information.
And I just wanted to let you know, CMS has designated a limited number of individuals who will maintain communications with state survey agencies and who will be able to take authoritative action with regard to federal survey and enforcement activities. And they've given a list of some people to reach out to if you need that. I just want you to know it's available. I'm not going to go through them all. But the different states have, as I said, a very limited number of people if there was somebody they had to reach out to.
So just try to summarize everything. Just recognize that standard survey activities will not be occurring. And let's be clear about what's happening with the accrediting organizations. Accrediting organizations will continue to do regular certification, recertification surveys, but no initial certification surveys. And that is at least the most recent information we have. Sue, to your point, there is some information in the reference I'm going to provide. If you have any urgent issues going on, such as if you're in the middle of a shutdown order by CMS, or if you have already gone through an initial certification survey just prior to the shutdown, and the paperwork is not being processed at this point to get you up and running.
And so a separate note on the shutdown, there will probably be quite a delay on the final payment rules, because we're kind of in the process of that. So
yeah, we expected them out on November 1st, and there's no indication that that will be released on, I think the first Monday is going to be November 3rd. And the last time this happened, the final rule didn't come out until almost the end of November, so be prepared for that. Yeah. And of course, this shutdown is already longer than the last one was. So, Sue, that was a lot to go through and kind of an urgent issue that we're dealing with. What else have we got in the news?
So something I wanted to mention as we go into cybersecurity, or finish out Cybersecurity Month. According to ASCA, EHR use in ASCs is increasing. ASCA used information that they gathered from their 60-second surveys, which are quarterly surveys on different topics that they use to gather information so they can better serve the ASC community. This July's survey was about electronic health record use and received 280 responses from centers in 42 states. 76% of the responding facilities reported the use of electronic medical records, and this is up from 64% in 2023 and 55% in 2021. I found it interesting that the most common benefits stated was the ability for data gathering, and operational efficiency was the second most common benefit mentioned. And there's a lot more information on ASCA's site from this survey and other surveys that they've done in the past. As always, we encourage everyone to become a member of ASCA and your own state association to support them in supporting you and the rest of the ASC community.
I found this interesting, Sue. You know, I think my experience as a surveyor is that there's, I only probably find about half, and this is more anecdotal, of the surgery centers that I survey have electronic medical records, or at least a full EHR. They might be scanning records into a computer system, which I don't really consider a true EHR, of course. Yeah. So it is interesting to see the relatively rapid adoption that we're seeing here between 2021 to 2023, and then on to 2025. And
it may be that some of the larger centers are more likely to, be more involved with ASCA and respond and have somebody that, although, as I said, they're 60-second surveys, so if you decided to do those, they try to make them very quick and easy and not time-consuming. But I wouldn't be surprised if it's a lot of the larger centers.
Yeah, and of course, it's also ASCA members that are filling out this survey too, which might be a slightly different population. So as we're going into this discussion of cybersecurity this month with our interview, I noted that we've had some issues lately with AWS, which is the Amazon Web Services program. Not many people actually know what AWS, but it does control quite a bit of the internet. And many of our centers, or quite a number of our clients and our listeners, have noted that they've had internet connectivity problems, which has caused some havoc in recent weeks. So, as I said, I'm referring to AWS, or Amazon Web Services. And there was an outage that affected a number of systems across the country.
I know, John, we heard from centers whose electronic medical record systems were completely offline for part of the day. Staff can't log in, document cases, or access their schedules. So it really brought operations to a standstill for a few hours, and sometimes even an entire day before they were back up and running.
Yeah, and we've become so reliant on these systems now that any interruption, first of all, it means that people have to go back and relearn their paper systems from before. And of course it does, definitely slow things down. Even though you probably thought it was great in the days when you could fill out a paper record very quickly, but transferring back and forth between them can be quite disruptive.
And some newer staff may not have ever done that if you're newer to the electronic medical records, and if they haven't been someplace else. So it's important to kind of do that training.
Do drills. Basis. That's actually what we recommend is do a drill of what you would do if the system went down. First of all, let's talk about what AWS is. AWS, or Amazon Web Services, is the cloud computing platform that powers a huge portion of the internet. Many of the systems that ASCs rely on every day, such as our electronic medical records, our billing platforms, our scheduling systems, even payroll systems, are hosted on these Amazon servers, these AWS servers. When one of those AWS data centers goes down, so these AWS data centers are all around the world, actually. So when one of those data centers goes down, all of the companies that use that region are impacted by it.
And that's what happened. The outage hit one of Amazon's major regions, which caused interruptions for a wide range of web applications, not just EMRs, but also e-prescribing tools, patient portals, and document sharing platforms that ASCs use regularly.
And this actually impacted us because we use Eventbrite, which was down for quite a while on both times that AWS had an issue, which caused problems for people that were trying to sign up for some of our upcoming conferences. So we even saw ripple effects outside of healthcare. Some centers couldn't access Microsoft 365, or as we mentioned earlier, payroll systems, or even those online vendor portals, which we have enough problems with supply chain, let alone not being able to order supplies. It really highlighted how dependent all of us have become on the cloud.
Yeah, and it's a great reminder that every ASC needs a solid downtime procedure. Paper backups of the schedule, manual documentation forms, and clear guidance for what to do when your systems go offline.
Exactly, and this ties into a broader issue of cybersecurity and infrastructure resilience. Even though this wasn't a cyber attack, it underscores how fragile interconnected systems can be. So after the break, we're going to continue this conversation with someone who knows this topic inside and out.
That's right. When we come back, we'll be joined by Paul Alcock from Surgical Information Systems to talk about cybersecurity in the ASC environment, what's changing, what risks you need to be aware of, and what steps you can take to protect your data and your patients.
So stay tuned. We'll be right back after this short break.
Surgical Information Systems is a proud sponsor of the ASC podcast with John Goehle. Our award-winning software platform, SIS Complete, is the choice of over 1,000 ASCs. Why do so many surgery centers operate smart with SIS solutions and services? Because modern cloud-based software with modules for inventory, scheduling, revenue cycle management, clinical documentation, patient communications, and analytics, all on one platform, streamlines workflows and delivers data, including detailed case costing, that helps centers run smoothly and stay focused on what matters most: patient care. Efficient, comprehensive, easy to use. That's smart. And it's all backed by an industry leader who has focused on surgical software for over 28 years. To learn how Surgical Information Systems ASC software or revenue cycle services team can help, call us at 800-866-0656 or visit us online at sisfirst.com.
I'm here with Paul Alcock with SIS. Paul, welcome back to the podcast. Today we're going to talk about a topic that we've talked about before, but it's time to kind of update what's going on, and certainly the issue of cybersecurity is not going away and certainly becoming even worse. So first of all, Paul, why don't you introduce yourself and your role at SIS?
Yeah, thanks, John. Great to be back on the show. Paul Alcock, I'm the CISO over at Surgical Information Systems. I've been with the company for about 8 years now, and my responsibility really is to guide cybersecurity strategy across the business. So ensuring that all the functional areas of cybersecurity are being considered, and all of our different business areas and business units. I know we're keeping up to date with these cyber threats and how we can be a little more proactive in dealing with them. And that's really what I wanted to talk to you all about today.
So why don't we start by talking about the current landscape of cybersecurity and the threats that are out there, just to kind of update our audience on where we are today compared to where we were, perhaps even a year ago.
Yeah, and it's a great place to start, right? We really want to understand what are these threats, what's the big deal with cybersecurity, and I don't think you have to look too far In the news cycles, we seem to see more and more of these high, big target events. Obviously, Change Healthcare is probably still relatively fresh in everybody's minds from February of last year, and that was pretty significant impact in the healthcare across the US for many months. But I think what's often overlooked is the smaller ASCs, right? They don't tend to make these big headlines across the news cycles, but ASCs are being increasingly targeted. And I think one of the reasons, probably more so than these larger health systems, and that's because they sit right in that intersection of high value data and traditionally pretty limited defenses. These cyber criminals, these bad actors, they know that these smaller ASCs don't always have the same resources as the larger hospital systems, but they still have that same valuable data, that PHI, payment data, credentials that they can monetize pretty quickly, either via extortion or being sold on the dark web.
Are we seeing an increase in the amount of cyber threats out there? Or is it about the same? Where do you feel we are right now, especially for the smaller centers, which tend to be our average listener here?
Yeah, well, I think the key, we're not necessarily seeing more groups targeting the healthcare system. We do see some of the larger, more sophisticated cyber threat actor groups leveraging this new, well, it's not even new, but it's been a couple of years now, this kind of ransomware as a service or malware as a service type business model, if you like, in which they make it very easy for folks who don't necessarily have the technical ability to pull these types of attacks off to go ahead and start targeting these ASCs. But I think one thing to highlight, and this may be, and I think it is, based on some of the conversations I've had with ASC leaders across the industry, is that from a bad actor's point of view, the reality is that ASCs aren't being chosen. You're not being purposely targeted per individual ASC. You are found. So you might not think that you're on the radar due to your size, but to an attacker, you're just another IP address with a potential value behind it. And we're seeing this firsthand. We talk about over the last year, more and more of our self-hosted clients have been reaching out, having been compromised, most often through some form of social engineering, like a phishing or business email compromise. And then it starts with a simple, convincing phishing message, or adversaries have scanned the internet and identified your weaknesses and unpatched vulnerability. And from there, they really focus in. At that point, they don't know who you are. But once they start to see those vulnerabilities, then that's when the trouble starts.
So let's talk about what it could do to an organization. Why don't we start or next talk about the impact on an organization? So, kind of discuss some of the things that can occur and how it can impact the operations of the average ASC.
Yeah, well, I think you can get into incident preparedness in a little bit and talk about what we can do to limit that impact. But I mean, candidly, if you don't have a plan or process in place to be able to respond to these types of incidents, then it can be devastating, right? You get a bad actor gains access to your systems, networks. You don't have the ability to identify that they're there. They can take their time. They can move through your systems. They can identify where your crown jewels live, so where your patient data sits. And if they can move around without tipping you off to their access to your environment, then when at the time is right, they kick off ransomware, or even before they do that, they start exfiltrating gigabytes or terabytes of patient data out of your environment onto their own servers, and then go ahead and kick off some form of ransomware to encrypt that data. So now you come in on a Monday morning, none of your computers are working, no one's able to log in, your EHR is down, you're back on paper. You need to reach out to your IT provider if you have one, if you have an internal team, try and identify what's going on. And that recovery phase, that rebuilding and getting the business back online can take weeks. I mean, we saw it with Change Healthcare. February last year, it was 3-4 months before they were fully operational again after that. And to a small ASC, it's devastating financially. I mean, we've seen some had to close their doors because they just couldn't recover.
What are some of the typical ways that ASCs, especially smaller ones, can be attacked?
Again, I think we talk about, and there's a number of different ways that adversaries can look to gain access. Most common is going to be some form of social engineering type attack. So this is phishing emails. We're seeing a lot more vishing, which is where they're essentially calling you up, pretending to be somebody else, looking to gain access to some sensitive information that would give them a leg up into getting into your organization. Something else that we see a lot of is, and this is targeting our own internal support staff and CIS users, is what we call business email compromise. And this is a type of social engineering incident where a facility employee has fallen victim to a standard phishing email. Maybe there was a link on there for them to access a OneDrive account. It asks for their credentials. They give them. Now the bad guys got access to the mailbox, and they essentially take over that mailbox. And they begin to target vendors and clients and patients from that authorized mailbox within the facility. We see that all too often, where luckily our team are trained on the CIS side. We're very, very heavily focused on building that awareness across our employee base. They're able to identify something that looks suspicious. They report it to the security team, and we can even follow up with the facility. And 9 times out of 10, they'll say, yeah, we've just figured out that this account was hacked and those emails were being used to target somebody else. So that's number one, social engineering. What we also observed more frequently of late is the exploitation of unpatched vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
In the past, I mean, we talk about patching. It's not a particularly sexy thing to talk about, right? Patching your systems, keeping them up to date. It's very, very easy to do, though. It's very low cost from a resource standpoint. You can set it to automatically update your systems. Not a huge burden, but something that we've noticed, John, in the past, probably this last 6 to 12 months, is that window from when a vulnerability is being publicly disclosed to when people actually know about it across the industry to it being attacked is shrinking dramatically. Down, it used to be weeks, months, vulnerability would be disclosed. You wouldn't see it exploited for months after. Now it's down to days or even hours. Adversaries are jumping on these vulnerabilities. They're scanning the internet, looking for those who haven't patched their systems, and then looking to take advantage of that as quickly as they can.
So I guess that feeds into the next topic here, which is like proactive cybersecurity strategies. You know, what type of strategies do our listeners need to develop for their organization? And it sounds like it goes right down to the equipment level, you know, the machine level, as well as the employees. So why don't we just discuss that?
Yeah. And I think the best defense is a layered one, right? And it all starts with visibility. You need to conduct some form of risk assessment. Even a lightweight risk assessment, you need to know where your data lives, what systems are critical to your operations, not just internally, but what third parties. We live in a world where we are highly interconnected with other vendors and third parties to be able to function as a business. So what are your single points of failure? Where are your critical assets? Where does your data live? Who are you relying on for business operations? Once you have that visibility, then you can really focus on those high impact fundamentals. And these are low cost, low effort resources and controls that we can put in place to really reduce the risk of compromise. First one, everybody should be aware of multi-factor authentication by now. I'm not saying that it's the be-all end-all when it comes to security. It's not going to stop everything, but it greatly reduces your risk of account takeover, unauthorized access, if you have multi-factor authentication everywhere, particularly for remote access, for your email, and for access to patient data. Then I already mentioned patching and updating your systems, not particularly glamorous, but it does prevent most attacks. I mentioned just a few moments ago, we're seeing that window between that public disclosure of vulnerabilities and them being exploited or abused by these bad actor groups shrinking very, very quickly. These bad guys are jumping right on these vulnerabilities. So we need to make sure that we have a consistent cadence for getting our systems updated and patched. Backups is another one, making sure that we're backing up our data. So if we do lose access to it in some type of ransomware or malware type event, then we're able to restore from those backups. And then access control, obviously key. We want to make sure that the right people have access to what they need to be able to perform their function, but it's not overly permissive. We're not giving everybody administrator access. And the reason why that's such a big deal, we talk about social engineering and account takeover. If everybody has administrator rights and one of your employees is compromised through social engineering, now the adversary has administrator rights to your systems and access to that data. And then you mentioned it, John, the last key thing, critical, is awareness and training. And getting your workforce up to speed on these threats, giving them the skills and knowledge to be able to identify when they are being targeted. What does a phishing email look like? What is just putting them in that mindset where everything they do, they have this bit of suspicion in the back of their minds where this doesn't seem quite right. This seems off. They're able to identify those red flags and report them to the appropriate folks within your ASC.
I think it is important to note that the HIPAA high-tech regs do require you to do a cybersecurity risk assessment or a risk assessment of your computer system. And my observation is that many organizations, first of all, don't even know that that's a requirement, and second, have no idea how to do it. And I guess third, and haven't done it. How easy is this? How frequently does it need to be done? And who should be engaged to do these types of risk assessments?
Yeah, and a risk assessment is critical, right? As the first thing I touched on, you need that visibility. You need to be able to identify what the risks are and not just blanket apply controls across your environment. And for somebody who's new to performing these types of assessments, it can be a challenge to identify, well, how many risks am I looking at, or what even are the risks? So I think it's really beneficial to seek some assistance from a qualified third party to have those risk assessments performed. We do every year, in addition to our own internal risk assessments. We always have somebody come in and kind of check our work, if you like, and make sure that we're on track. And we are considering, particularly somebody, we're obviously very familiar with our environment. And that's great. Obviously, we want to be familiar with our environment and how it functions, but having that second set of eyes who maybe isn't, maybe highlight some areas of risk that we hadn't considered initially. So looking to a qualified third party to help you in that effort is going to be really beneficial. But as far as cadence for these, I would say that you need to do it at least annually.
Yeah.
Performing these risk assessments. And then also, whenever you make any kind of material change to the business, if you're bringing in a new EHR solution, obviously we want to perform a risk assessment on that to identify if there's any gaps, if it doesn't meet our own internal security processes, what do we need to do to make sure that it does? So annually, and then anytime you make any significant change, significant investment in vendor relationships, then we want to make sure we're performing that risk assessment.
I've noticed going to conferences lately that there's a lot of new companies out there, a lot of old companies that now are mentioning specifically that they do security risk assessments here, and do want to search them out, check their credentials, obviously, and make sure that they know about the healthcare field in particular. I think that's really critical here, is that healthcare is different than other industries.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Make sure that you are doing your due diligence whenever you're bringing in a third party to help you with this.
Let's talk about incident response. It kind of starts with policies and procedures, doesn't it? My favorite topic, obviously. But talk about how we should plan for an incident response. Obviously, we want to make sure we know what to do when an event actually occurs.
Yeah, so it's we hear this phrase a lot. It's not if, it's when. And when something does happen, what separates a major incident from a minor incident is really going to be down to preparation. So in your strong defenses, incidents will happen. And the difference between chaos and control really comes down to how you prepare for that. So having that plan, you talked about policies and procedures, having that plan, it clearly defines who does what. So who would isolate systems? Who would handle the communication internally and externally? Who would document any technical artifacts or the process as you're running through that response activity? And who's ultimately responsible for making decisions for the business and for getting your operations back up on and running. I would say the first 24 hours are going to matter the most. That's when you're really focused on containing the damage, getting those adversaries out of your environment, identifying what it is that they did while they were in your environment, preserving that evidence, and keep leadership informed as you run through this. Actually, we ran a tabletop exercise Tuesday afternoon of this week. And again, we didn't do this internally. We brought in a third party who specializes in this type of work to run through, this was more on the technical side, but to run through the technical elements of how we would respond. And the topic of that, or the scenario that we were given for that tabletop exercise was a ransomware event on one of our internal systems. And we run through inject after inject of what could occur. And this is based off of real world examples that this third party team has observed as part of their function and their role. They brought it to us so we can really test this plan out. So a tabletop exercises, it may seem like it's not as valuable as it is. It's one of the most effective tools in my mind to really test your readiness. One of the things that it did for us was we had a team of probably 12 people on the call. It just fostered that communication, really got us talking about, okay, well, what would we do now? In this incident, we found somebody in our environment. What do we do now? Do we isolate? Do we shut down our hosting environment? And those are the kind of questions that you kind of ask one another as you work through these. So everyone will look through this mock breach. We talk about how we'd respond, what information we'd need, and how quickly we'd recover. And what's great is it turns cybersecurity from that checklist into an experience. Folks actually get to learn how their roles connect in this type of situation, from operations, clinical, IT, communications, marketing, sales. So it's not just theory, it's practice. And that's actually the idea behind a session that I'm leading at ASCA 2026, with a slight twist to it. We're calling this session Unlocking Cyber Resilience, an ASC Cybersecurity Escape Room Challenge. And this is really like a hands-on simulation where ASC leaders can work in teams through real-world cybersecurity challenges, from phishing detection, password analysis, incident prioritization, and even some decryption exercise based on clues that we will be handing out. It's going to be fast-paced, engaging, and hopefully really will drive home some of the same principles as a tabletop exercise as far as collaboration, critical thinking, and preparedness under pressure goes. So, and this session isn't to make anybody a cybersecurity expert. It's just to make them confident decision makers when that unexpected happens.
Yeah, and you bring up a very good point here, and it sounds like that session will really help ASCs to be better prepared for the situation, but also give them some skills in developing their own internal drills, for example. One thing we've been recommending people do is, we're required to do disaster drills. This is what I would definitely call a disaster drill, and test out what you're going to do. Now, it's a big topic, so you probably want to narrow it down to some minor parts to it, or isolated parts to it. For example, what would happen if your EMR system went down or was compromised? How would you recover from that? But really doing ongoing drills, because there's no doubt that as part of your hazard vulnerability analysis every year, cybersecurity is going to be one of those top threats out there, given its prevalence right now in the marketplace. So I think some good advice there, Paul, is for our listeners is to at least, if they haven't done one recently, do a drill focused on cybersecurity and how do you recover from it based upon the policies that and protocols that you've just kind of outlined.
Yeah. Again, it doesn't need to be particularly comprehensive and technical. Right. Just keep it simple. Like you say, what would happen if we came in this morning and all of our systems were locked? Yeah. What would we do? Who would we call? How would we resolve this? And the key here is, again, it's about resilience. How quickly can we contain this and get the business back up and running?
It all comes down to staff training, doesn't it? How do you prepare for it? What do you do to develop a culture where people are aware of the risks out there and are I can you mentioned it earlier, constantly skeptical about everything that comes into them, so that they question everything before they accidentally make the wrong move.
Yeah, and that you use the right. It's a culture, and that's what we're really trying to foster across the business. The annual security awareness training, annual HIPAA training, it's not enough to develop that security culture across your ASC or across your business. It needs to be continually reinforced. We do at CIS monthly security awareness training. We do monthly phishing simulation campaigns. We track all of those metrics. And the human element really is our biggest challenge, right? From a technical standpoint, we can implement all the controls we like, but we still have the human element that has access to this PHR, that is managing those credentials, that really has the keys to give these adversaries access. And they know that, and that's why they're being targeted so prevalently. So I think it's about 80% of breaches have some form of human component that's been exploited, typically through social engineering. But the point of the training and the way that we try to do it at CIS is that we're not looking to make everybody scared. We're not taking an approach of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. We're really training to build confidence, to make our associates more secure in performing their daily function. And it really, I think one of the key successes we've seen in building this culture is that from the top down, our CEO, Tom Stampia, is extremely focused on security across the business and highlighting the need for everybody's part in securing surgical information systems. And that really helps when it's driven from the CEO down to the entire executive leadership team, down through to temp employees and those just coming in working for a school break. It really does help, and it needs to be reinforced. Again, this is one of the biggest vulnerabilities that we have. We talk about patching vulnerabilities. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to patch a vulnerability in the human element that exists within these businesses, and that's going to require that culture and continual reinforced cybersecurity awareness training.
We've seen a trend toward canned education programs out there, and there's organizations that sell these packages to surgery centers. I'm always very leery about them because they tend to be very brief and don't focus on all the things that are really important to our organization. And I think to your point here that education needs to, it can't be just about change your password periodically and make sure you don't share it with anybody. It's got to be much deeper than that. It needs to be more than a 5-10 minute conversation as part of your annual training program.
Exactly. And we have the same thing. We use a security awareness and training provider. What we typically try to do with the monthly awareness campaigns, if you like, is that we keep it to around about 15 minutes. We vary the topics. So I don't think to date we've done the same thing twice. It may be similar 6 months down the line, but it'll have a different twist on it. The tool that we use is really good about updating that content, and they provide it in different formats too. So you could have one where you simply click through and read it, click through, you take a test at the end. Some of them are video-based, some of them are game-based. And the key there is really we want people to pay attention to it. We don't want it to be one of those things that, it's got to do. And they ultimately, some of them will be that, take that approach. But we want to make sure that it's as engaging as possible and that folks are beginning to learn that. And we've seen it pay off. When we first started, and I don't mind sharing these stats, when we first started our awareness training back in 2016, 2017, when I was at CIS, we had some pretty nasty failure rates when we would form these campaigns, up to 18 to 20% failure rates of these phishing simulations. We're down to less than 2% of failure rates now. So when you get to see, and again, we track all of these metrics to make sure that we're moving in the right direction. So it works. It works. And then in addition to that, we'll send out notices via email. We do quarterly all hands meetings. Like I mentioned, Tom will always talk about the importance everybody plays in securing our organization, completing security training. There'll often be times that I'll be on there and I'll talk to the entire company about some of the threats that we're seeing specific to CIS and how they can remain vigilant. But again, yeah, multiple different approaches, keeping it fresh. And the key here really is we're trying to build those skills and that knowledge and just make people feel confident that they're able to identify these threats.
Yeah, and Paul's referring to Tom, who's the CEO of SIS, and the fact that he's spearheading some of these or starting some of these conversations. That's really a great point. And I take another thing away from that, Paul, too, is that so let me put in the parlance of our listeners. We often have monthly or quarterly updates on infection control because that's how important infection control is in our organization. Well, you probably should be taking this as seriously and perhaps have that same type of ongoing education instead of just doing it once a year where you're just kind of updating people on what's happened in the last year. These quarterly discussions at the very least, and monthly, hopefully, if you have the time, could keep people totally up to date based upon things that have happened in the last month.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to play a sport and you wanted to get good at it, would you train just once a year?
Yeah, good point.
Right, you'd be training a lot more frequently to build those skills and that knowledge, and that's really what we need to do.
So we have a breach, and how do we deal with the? It's all about our patients, right? How do we deal with that side of it once all your systems have failed here and you actually ended up with a breach?
Yeah, I think one of the keys here, and we saw this again, not to pick on Change Healthcare, but when something does go wrong, I think transparency is going to be your best asset. Everybody, not that we're getting numb to cyber attacks, but we see it so frequently now across the media that it's not. Again, it's not a case of if, it's a case of when.
Right.
And I think that patients and your partners will understand that these things do happen. But what matters most is how you communicate and how you share that information. Wait in months and months and months to notify your patients that their data could have potentially been compromised. It's just optically, it's not good. There's a window of opportunity there for adversaries to begin leveraging that data for misdoing. So I think this comes down to that preparation piece. We often overlook the communication. We're always focused on how we get the business back up and running, but having some kind of templated messages ready that you can go out and begin to communicate and share a little bit of what you're looking at. And obviously, you want to make sure that these are being reviewed by your legal counsel and compliance as well. Make sure that the message is calm, factual, empathetic. Kind of explain what happened and what it is that you're doing to fix it, and also what those next steps are. You don't need to go into the technical details, but keeping folks up to date on what's going on, I think, is really important.
Yeah, and Paul, you mentioned one thing that's so important. The first phone call that you got to make after you've had a breach is, of course, get your lawyer involved and your insurance carrier, and hopefully you all have an insurance carrier that because you've purchased cybersecurity insurance for those risks that you really can't control at all. That's what's really saved a lot of these organizations that have made the national news here. Otherwise, they could have been out of business completely. I mean, it's still no guarantee that you won't end up being out of business, but it certainly will help you to survive a major event like this. Why don't we talk a little bit about regulatory? I mean, we've kind of mentioned it before, the HIPAA regulations, though. What other regulatory considerations might there be out there?
So obviously, if you've been impacted by some form of cyber incident and we've triggered that breach notification, 500 records, then you are going to be on OCR's radar. So it's quite likely that they're going to come in and want to take a look around and make sure that you have done your part. You have followed those HIPAA standards and they are implemented, and you can validate through evidence that that's the case during the incident. But HIPAA is really the starting point. It's not the finish line. HIPAA compliance does not equal security.
Yeah.
We've all viewed HIPAA security privacy breach notification rules. They are extremely vague and ambiguous.
Yeah.
And it's not, I often see people talk about how, we're HIPAA compliant, and that's fantastic. You need to be, but you need more than that to really be secure and prevent these types of attacks. So yes, security rule lays out some administrative, physical, technical safeguards that you need to put in place, but it doesn't tell you how to do it. And that's where we need to look a little bit further at some of the more highly regarded and well-known frameworks like the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, if you SOC 2 for those SaaS hosted products, ISO 27001. There are a ton of frameworks out there that we can really leverage to help guide building our information security program. And in doing so, you're going to find that you're actually meeting those HIPAA requirements anyway.
Yeah, actually, you bring up a very good point, is that we talk a lot about regulations here on the podcast, but to be honest with you, a bad cybersecurity event, probably the regulatory side is the least of your concerns in the end. You got operational issues, you got patient privacy, you got all of these other things going on that you're going to have to deal with. The regulatory issues might end up with fines and penalties, but it's nothing compared to not being able to actually do your operations, which is, of course, the core of what we do. So, Paul, as always, this has been great. Do you have any final thoughts about this topic?
I think if I was just to condense the last 30-odd minutes into a closing statement, I'd say that I'd really want every ASC leader to take this away, and that's cybersecurity isn't all about technology; it's about leadership. It's about eliminating risk as much as you possibly can. You can't eliminate all risk, but you can understand it, you can manage it, and you can prepare for it. So 3 things that you should do consistently is assess where you stand, train your people, and test your plans. And I think with those 3 actions, you are going to build that resilience. And resilience is what keeps your ASC doors open, operating safely and confidently in today's cyber threat environment.
Paul, as always, it's great talking to you. I'm looking forward to that presentation in ASCA 2026. I think that's going to be interesting. Knowing my luck, it's going to be opposite my workshop, though. But
I'm looking forward to seeing you.
The same here. You take it easy.
Thanks, John.
Thanks.
In this segment, we provide an update on upcoming topics for the podcast, our upcoming virtual conferences, and upcoming speaking engagements for John and his staff, and other events in the ASC industry.
So the Joint Commission Ambulatory Care Conference is this coming week, November 5th through the 6th at the Crowne Plaza Chicago O'Hare in Rosemont, Illinois.
The Washington Ambulatory Surgery Center Association's 2025 Annual Education Conference and Trade Show is November 6th and 7th, 2025 at the Tulalip Resort and Spa in Tulalip, Washington. John's going to be speaking at the conference and doing a special episode, and we'll have a booth there.
We are. The first time that we've had a booth there. We're very excited about sponsoring this great conference. And the Colorado ASC Association Conference will be held November 13th and 14th at the Denver Marriott West in Golden, Colorado. I'll be speaking at the conference, and we'll do another special episode there also. And don't forget about our virtual ASC Multi-State Conference, which is November 20th and 21st, presented virtually. For more information, you can visit ASC-Central.com. If you're a member of one of the sponsoring state associations, you can attend for free. Or if you're a patron member of the podcast, again, you can get information about being a patron member at ASC-Central.com. Or if you're a client of ASC, or if you're a client of Ambulatory Healthcare Strategies. This is going to be a great conference, 16 hours of education, a great way to get AEUs and IPCHs, and we always have a lot of fun. This is our 3rd year doing it.
So ASCA and SAMBA, and SAMBA is the Anesthesiology Association. They are combining for a conference and expo May 13th through the 16th, 2026 in Washington, D.C., and I think this is the first time they've done this in quite a few years.
Yeah, I think it might be either 15 or 20 years. I was actually, I think I was on the board of ASCA, or it was FAST at the time when they last did it. I'm excited about being back in Washington, D.C. It is one of our favorite locations there at the, it's going to be at one of the Gaylord hotels in Washington, D.C. And the American Academy of Ambulatory Care Nursing, or AAACN, their annual conference is April 14th through the 17th, 2026 at the Hilton Orlando in Lake Buena Vista, Florida. And don't forget about our on-demand versions of our ASC Director of Nursing, ASC Administrators, and our ASC Business Office Managers bootcamps, which are available on our sister website at ASC-Central.com. And I do want to remind everybody again to become a patron member of the podcast. Don't miss out on all of those benefits by joining the Patron Program. And you can get more information at ASC-Central.com. This membership platform is your go-to resource for all aspects of ASC regulatory and accreditation compliance, operations, and financial management, and it's designed with the busy schedules of administrators, nurse managers, and business office managers in mind. By becoming a member, you gain access to our regular, usually weekly Zoom sessions, typically held on Saturdays, though we do move it around every once in a while to a Friday or a Monday, and where you can engage with other patrons of our podcast team, including usually at least 2 surveyors on that weekly drop-in. But that's just the beginning. Your membership unlocks a wide range of resources, including our virtual conferences such as Credentialing Conference and the Conditions for Coverage Conference. And you'll also find valuable tools such as sample policies, procedures, forms, and our highly regarded fire and disaster drill kits. And your support of our Patron Program helps us to maintain and grow the podcast, covering essential costs like research, travel, equipment, and production. To learn more and to become a member, visit ASC-Central.com. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the ASC Podcast with John Goehle. We hope you found the discussion insightful. If you did, please share it with your colleagues in the ASC community, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we appreciate your feedback and suggestions for future topics. Reach out anytime at comments@ascpodcast.com.
A special thank you goes out to our incredible team, sound editor Susan Cronkite, executive producer John Goehle, and our committed research team, Sue Cronkite, Jenna Alvarez, Judy D'Ambrosio, Mike D'Ambrosio, Zach Kelleritis, Jim Masters, Stuart Rosenberg, Amy Cronkite, Lori Rodricks, Kathy Foti, Donna Macchio, Christina Norman, and Katie Pearson. Your hard work makes this podcast possible. Our theme music is by Media Sushi and Mike Noah. The ASC Podcast with John Goehle is hosted on Podbean and can be found on all major podcast platforms. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. This episode of the ASC Podcast with John Goehle is sponsored by Surgical Information Systems, SIS. SIS's mission is to deliver solutions and services that help surgery providers, regardless of care setting, improve their organization so they can deliver the highest level of care to their patients. For more information, go to sisfirst.com. This podcast is an educational and operational tool and is not intended to be a comprehensive resource for all rules, regulations, and standards that an ambulatory surgery center must meet. The advice provided should not be considered as, nor does it constitute, legal advice or opinion. When reviewing specific situations involving legal and regulatory issues, attorneys and other professionals should be consulted. This has been a production of Eden Group Development. All rights are reserved. If you're interested in advertising or sponsoring the ASC Podcast with John Goehle, please email us at info@ascpodcast.com. We would love to hear your questions and comments. Please email us at comments@ascpodcast.com.